All right, let's get right into a topic that's, well, it's as complex as it is disturbing. We're going to look past the simple, tragic headline of a person lost at sea. Instead, we're going to pull back the curtain and examine the system itself, what we're calling the structural mechanics of disappearance.
You know, it almost always starts the same way. An alert goes out from a ship somewhere in the middle of a vast ocean, and the report is clean, simple. A cadet is missing at sea. It looks like a terrible, sudden accident, just one person lost to the sheer scale of the water.
But what if that's not the real story at all? This gets to the absolute heart of it. That final moment, the disappearance itself, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The real story, the one that truly matters, has been unfolding quietly for weeks, maybe even months, long before any alarm bells start ringing. So let's start with that official story. Let's look at what happens by the book, in the moments right after a cadet is reported missing. To make this real, you can think of cases like Sartak Mahapatra's. Now, just to be clear, this isn't an investigation into any one specific case. We're using these reoccurring events to try and understand the underlying conditions that just keep allowing them to happen. And make no mistake, the system does respond. Right away, the whole machinery of procedure kicks into gear. Search plans are activated, distress alerts are broadcast, authorities are notified. And on paper, it all looks perfect. The system is performing exactly as it was designed to. But to really get what's going on, we have to peel back that first layer. We need to look at the incredibly unique and frankly vulnerable position of a cadet. Who are they really, and what is their actual job on a ship today? So officially, it's simple. A cadet is a trainee. They aren't even counted as part of the ship's official crew, the minimum number of people required to run the vessel safely. According to the paperwork, they're just there to learn. But here is the absolute crux of the issue. In practice, the reality is often the complete opposite. On ships that are already running with a lean crew, cadets become the unofficial, uncounted workforce. They're the ones picking up the slack, handling all the extra tasks the official crew doesn't have time for. They become absolutely essential, but without any of the official recognition or the protections that come with it. And this is where you can really see the massive difference in structural power. An able seaman, a full crew member, has a clearly defined role and the authority to question an unsafe order. But for a cadet, asking that same question often gets labeled as having an attitude problem. A crew member has safeguards. A cadet is just expected to do what they're told. Because, hey, pretty much anything can be justified as training. In this whole situation, this invisibility, it's actually reinforced by the very safety systems that are supposed to help. In fact, the problem gets even harder to see when you start looking at the ship's paperwork, which usually paints this picture of flawless compliance. I mean, when investigators get on board after something goes wrong, what do they find? A perfect paper trail. The logs for rest hours are all filled out, perfectly compliant. Training checklists, all signed. The paperwork is spotless, almost too perfect, you know? And this quote just nails the shift that happens. The paperwork stops being a tool to make sure people are safe and instead becomes a shield. It's insulation. It insulates the entire operation from any real accountability by hiding what's actually happening, the exhaustion, the lack of real supervision. It proves you have a safety system, but it doesn't prove that the system is actually working. Okay, so if the paperwork is basically an illusion, what about the human element? What about the official channels that are supposed to let people speak up if something is seriously wrong? Well, the system does have a kind of emergency exit. It's called the Designated Person Ashore, or DPA. This position was created specifically to give any crew member a way to go around the captain and officers on the ship and report a major safety problem directly to the company on shore. It sounds like the perfect solution, doesn't it? A direct lifeline for anyone who feels like they're in danger. Which brings us to the really big question. Why is this lifeline almost never used by the very people who need it the most? The answer, in a word, is fear. For a trainee, someone at the very, very bottom of the ladder, using that official channel doesn't feel like a right. It feels like a career-ending move. The gap between a scared 19-year-old cadet and a corporate safety manager on another continent, well, it's just too big to cross. And that silence is locked in place by some pretty powerful cultural barriers. You've got the obvious stuff, right? Fear of getting a bad reputation, worrying you'll never get hired again. But there's something deeper, a concept called power distance. In many of the cultures that make up the global seafaring workforce, you're taught from childhood not to question authority.
ever. So for a cadet, speaking up isn't just breaking a rule. It feels like a fundamental act of disrespect.
And this is where it all comes together. You take an invisible workforce, you wrap it in insulating paperwork, and you enforce a culture of silence. What you get is a system where accountability for what happens to a human being just gets spread so thin that it basically vanishes.
And you can see this broken accountability so clearly right here, in this asymmetry. Just look at how the system treats the failure of a machine versus the loss of a person. A ship's engine, it's monitored constantly in real time. A human loss, that's reconstructed from memory after the fact. A faulty part triggers a major design review. A human loss, well, that's often just labeled missing, which actually lowers the level of investigation required.
And here's the final layer of insulation. A ship's safety certificate, the official document that says its safety system works, can stay perfectly valid even after a person has vanished from that ship. How? Because the audits check for the presence of a system, not for a successful outcome. The system can fail a person in the most catastrophic way imaginable, and the certificate on the wall remains untouched. Which brings us to this really powerful conclusion. The tragedy here isn't a lack of rules. The rules are there. The procedures are there. The tragedy is that these systems exist in a vacuum, with no one taking real ownership for the human beings inside them. The focus is all on the paper, not the people.
And so that leaves us with a pretty haunting final question. When a system keeps producing the same predictable, tragic outcome over and over again, at what point do we have to ask, is this system actually failing? Or is it working exactly the way it was designed to?